My name is Clara Jensen, and I'm 58 years old. The night my father died, he held my hand and whispered, "You're my greatest regret." I walked out of that hospital shaking, with anger, not grief. After everything he'd done to me, he still blamed me, even with his last breath. But a week later, I got a call from his lawyer. My father, the man who disowned me, humiliated me, erased me from his life, had left me everything. His company, his money, his house. Everyone said it was guilt. But when I opened the letter he'd hidden for me, I realized it wasn't guilt that made him change his will. It was fear. Fear of what my brother had done, and the truth he'd died trying to warn me about. The steady beeping of hospital monitors filled the sterile room, a rhythm that both comforted and tormented me. I sat at the edge of my father's bed, his once powerful hands now thin and pale against the white sheets. I hadn't seen him in nearly 15 years, and yet here I was, summoned by the nurses because, apparently, I was still listed as his next of kin. He looked smaller than I remembered, deflated somehow, like time had drained not only his strength, but his pride. My father, Harold Jensen, had always been a man of stature, a businessman who could silence a room with one sharp look. But lying there, frail and shrunken beneath tubes and wires, he seemed like a shadow of the tyrant I grew up with. I didn't know what to say. The silence stretched between us, thick with everything that had been left unsaid. Then slowly he turned his head toward me. His eyes, once piercing blue, were faded, clouded by years and regret. His lips parted, and his voice came out a whisper, rough and cracked. "You're my greatest regret." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. My chest tightened, my throat closing around air that wouldn't come. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to scream, to demand what he meant after all these years. But instead, I sat frozen, watching his eyelids flutter closed, as his breathing slowed again into shallow, uneven gasps. I didn't cry. I didn't even move. I just stared at the man who'd broken me in ways he would never understand. My father and I had never been close. From the time I was a child, I knew Daniel, my older brother, was the one who could do no wrong. Daniel was the prodigy, the golden son who followed in our father's footsteps, who went to business school, who learned how to shake hands with confidence and speak with authority. And me? I was the disappointment who spent too much time painting, dreaming, and questioning everything Harold demanded. I remember the day I told him I'd been accepted to an art academy instead of the business program he'd chosen for me. His face turned red, his jaw clenched, and his words sliced through me like glass. "Art is for people who fail at everything else, Clara. You're wasting your life." That was the day I stopped trying to earn his approval. But I never stopped wanting it. As I sat there in that hospital room, memories washed over me. Birthday parties where he never showed up. School recitals where his seat was always empty. The sound of my mother defending me until she grew too tired to fight anymore. She passed when I was 21, and after that, my father's coldness turned to stone. The last time we spoke before today was the night he disowned me. I had come home to tell him I'd sold my first painting. Instead of congratulating me, he accused me of stealing money from the family account to fund my hobby. I still remember the sound of the door slamming behind me, his voice echoing down the hall. "You're no daughter of mine." And now, decades later, I was the only one left to watch him die. The doctor entered quietly, clipboard in hand, his expression heavy with professional sympathy. He checked the monitors, adjusted a few tubes, then looked at me. "He doesn't have much time," he said gently. "If there's anything you want to say, now would be the moment." I looked at my father's face, lined and weary. There were words trapped in my chest. "You hurt me. You never saw me. You ruined us." But none of them came out. Instead, I took his hand, cool and dry, and held it the way I wished he'd held mine when I was a child. I watched his chest rise once, twice, then stop. The monitor flatlined. The doctor turned it off and nodded quietly. "I'm sorry, Ms. Jensen." I sat there for a long time, listening to the silence that followed. It was strange, peaceful almost, like a storm that had finally passed. I thought I would feel relief, or maybe grief, but instead, there was only emptiness. The kind that settles deep in your bones. I didn't attend his funeral. Daniel arranged everything, of course. He always handled appearances. He called once, his voice dripping with bitterness. You could at least pretend to care, Clara. He was still our father. I said nothing. I hung up. A week passed. I threw myself into painting, trying to lose myself in color and texture, but my thoughts kept returning to those last words. You're my greatest regret. What did he mean? Regret for me? For something he did? For something he didn't do? Then, one quiet afternoon, as I was cleaning my brushes, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered hesitantly. Ms. Jensen, a man's voice said. This is Robert Keller, from Keller and Associates Law. I'm calling regarding the estate of the late Harold Jensen. I felt my stomach twist. Yes? There was a pause on the line. We need you to come in, Ms. Jensen. Your father's will has been finalized. He left you everything. The brush slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. For a long moment I couldn't breathe. Everything? After a lifetime of rejection, why now? Why me? I hung up the phone, staring at the silent room, my father's final words, echoing in my mind. You're my greatest regret. What could possibly make a man leave everything to the daughter he never loved? When I pulled up to the law office that morning, I honestly expected a formality, a simple signature, maybe a box of my father's old cufflinks or photographs, something symbolic but meaningless. I wasn't there for money. Truthfully, I wasn't sure why I went at all. Maybe curiosity, maybe guilt, or maybe I just needed to hear, one last time, that I didn't matter to him. The building was quiet, with polished wood and faintly humming fluorescent lights. As I walked into the waiting area, the air changed, heavy, cold. Sitting in the corner, legs crossed and expression sharp as ever, was my brother, Daniel. He looked almost exactly like our father, same broad shoulders, same impatient eyes, but where our father's presence commanded authority, Daniel's radiated arrogance. Next to him sat Harper, his perfectly manicured wife, scrolling on her phone like she was bored of the entire affair. When he saw me, Daniel smirked. Well, look who decided to show up. Thought you'd be too busy painting flowers to care about Dad's legacy. I ignored the jab, taking the seat farthest from him. I was asked to be here, I said quietly. Sure you were, Harper murmured, without looking up. Before I could respond, the door opened, and a tall, silver-haired man stepped in. Robert Keller, the lawyer who had called me. He greeted us with polite professionalism and gestured toward the conference room. Thank you for coming, both of you. Please have a seat. Let's get started. The room was pristine, mahogany table, a few leather chairs, and one thick envelope in the center with my father's name printed neatly across it. I stared at it, my heart pounding. This was it, the last trace of Harold Jensen's control. Mr. Keller cleared his throat. Your father's will was updated 3 months prior to his passing. It was witnessed, notarized, and filed according to state law. Unless there's a proven claim of coercion or incapacity, it stands as valid. Daniel leaned back, smirking. Don't worry, Robert. I'm sure she's not getting much. Dad knew better. The lawyer opened the envelope and began to read. I, Harold Jensen, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. I could feel Daniel's gaze burning into the side of my face. The lawyer continued, his tone steady and unemotional until the words began to blur together. Legal terms, asset listings, account numbers, until he reached the part that made the air leave the room. And I bequeath the entirety of my estate, including all real properties, financial accounts, and corporate shares of Jensen Holdings, to my daughter, Clara Jensen. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to stop. Then Daniel's voice cut through the silence like a knife. What? He leaned forward, face flushed red. That's impossible. You mean to say he left everything to her? All of it? Mr. Keller nodded. That's correct. Daniel's hand slammed against the table, startling both me and Harper. This is a joke. She's been estranged for years. She didn't even come to his funeral. You expect me to believe he gave her everything? I'm afraid the document is clear, the lawyer said calmly. Your father revoked the previous version of his will and replaced it with this one. I have all the necessary certifications. Daniel turned toward me, fury flashing in his eyes. What did you do, Clara? Did you manipulate him while he was sick? Whisper in his ear about forgiveness and redemption? God, I should have known you'd find a way to play the victim. His words stung, but I didn't rise to them. I just stared at the papers on the table, my mind spinning. I hadn't even spoken to our father before he died, not beyond those last bitter words. I hadn't asked for anything, and yet here it was, a lifetime's worth of wealth, power, and responsibility dumped into my lap by the man who'd once called me worthless. I didn't do anything, I said softly. I didn't even know he changed his will. Liar, Daniel hissed. Harper reached for his arm, whispering, Daniel, stop. This isn't the place. But he shook her off. No, she needs to hear this. You're pathetic, Clara. You always have been. If Dad saw any good in you, he must have been delusional at the end. Mr. Keller straightened his papers, his tone firm but polite. Mr. Jensen, please. These accusations won't change the contents of the will. Your father made this decision on his own, and it was witnessed legally. Daniel's jaw flexed. We'll see about that. I'll contest it. Every last piece of it. He stormed out, Harper trailing behind him, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. The door slammed so hard the picture frames on the wall rattled. I sat there in silence for a moment, staring at the empty chair across from me. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated even. But all I felt was confusion and guilt. What was my father thinking? Why now, after all those years of rejection? Mr. Keller slid a folder toward me. These are the inheritance documents. The assets are being transferred to your name, but I'd suggest reviewing them carefully before making any decisions. His tone softened. There's also something else your father left behind. A sealed envelope addressed specifically to you. I took the folder with trembling hands. A letter? He nodded. It was with the will. He requested it be given to you privately. When I left the office, the afternoon sun was harsh, glaring off the windows like judgment. I drove home in silence, the folder on the passenger seat like a ghost staring back at me. At home, I poured myself a glass of water and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the papers. The inheritance was real. Bank accounts, property deeds, corporate shares. I was now the owner of everything that had once belonged to the man who'd despised me. Was this revenge against Daniel? Was it an apology to me? Or was it just another cruel joke from beyond the grave? As I thumbed through the stack of documents, something slipped loose. A small cream-colored envelope with my name written across it in my father's unmistakable handwriting. My hands shook as I turned it over. The seal was still intact. It read, "To Clara, when you're ready to know the truth." The envelope felt heavier than paper should. My father's handwriting stared back at me, elegant, deliberate, familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. To Clara, when you're ready to know the truth. I sat at my kitchen table for nearly half an hour, just staring at it. The late afternoon light streamed through the blinds, striping the table in gold and shadow. I wasn't sure I was ready. What truth could possibly make sense of decades of silence, anger, and abandonment? Finally, I took a breath, slid a letter opener under the flap, and unfolded the pages inside. The first line made my heart freeze. Clara, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I swallowed hard. His handwriting was still firm, controlled, so unmistakably him. I know I have no right to ask for your time, but there are things I must tell you before the truth dies with me. I was not the father you deserved. I was hard, prideful, and cruel in ways I justified as discipline. I thought I was shaping you into someone strong. I see now I was only breaking you. I blinked through the sting of tears, my hand trembling as I turned the page. For years I blamed you for something you didn't do. I told myself I was punishing a thief when in truth I was protecting one. Daniel stole from me. Years ago, when you were 23 and working at the company, he embezzled from the accounts and moved the money through a vendor under your name. When the audit came back, it looked like you were guilty. My breath caught, the words blurred. I could almost hear his voice, stern, cold, echoing across the decades. You took what wasn't yours, Clara. You've humiliated this family. I remembered standing in his office, surrounded by ledgers and balance sheets I didn't understand, while Daniel stood behind him, silent but smug. I remembered pleading through tears, "It wasn't me, Dad." And his answer, flat and final, "Get out." Back then, I thought it was just another act of favoritism. I thought he'd always loved Daniel more, and that I'd simply failed one too many times. But reading his words now, I realized it had been worse than that. He'd believed I was a criminal. He'd looked at his own daughter and seen a liar. I didn't learn the truth until years. Later, the letter continued. An old accountant, Thomas Avery, came to me after he retired. He said Daniel had threatened him to falsify records. Thomas showed me everything. Bank transfers, receipts, signatures. It was all there. I confronted your brother, and he admitted it, but begged me to stay silent to protect the family name. I agreed. I told myself it was too late to fix things. That's the kind of coward I'd become. I pressed my hand to my mouth, the tears finally breaking free. I couldn't tell if they were from rage or relief. He knew. All this time, he knew I'd been innocent, and he said nothing. He let me live with that stain, with the whispering, with the shame. I'd built my whole life around surviving that betrayal, and now it unraveled in a few lines of ink. I wanted to reach out to you, he wrote. I tried more than once, but every time I thought of your face, I saw what I'd done to you, and I couldn't bear it. So I punished myself the only way I could. I kept Daniel close, and I watched him destroy everything I built. He took from me, from my company, from my health, and I let him. Maybe that was justice. I leaned back, my breath shaking. My father, the man who never admitted a mistake, had written this confession by hand. It was more apology than I ever thought I'd get, but it was also too late to mean anything. When I told you you were my greatest regret, the letter went on, I didn't mean you were the regret, Clara. I meant what I did to you. I should have believed you. I should have defended you. You were the only one who ever stood up for truth, and I destroyed that. If I could trade my fortune to change that moment, I would, but all I have left are these words. I stopped reading then, unable to go on for a moment. The words blurred through the tears, my heart twisting with a mixture of sorrow, vindication, and fury. For so long, I'd carried the weight of his rejection. I had convinced myself I was unworthy of his love, when in truth, he'd been too proud to admit how wrong he was. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the pages. Maybe an hour, maybe more. When I finally reached the last paragraph, I realized there was one more sheet tucked behind the letter. Clara, if you can forgive me, know that I left everything to you because I trust you to do what's right. You've always had the strength I lacked. There is one more thing you need to see. You'll find it enclosed, but read it alone. It's for your eyes only. I frowned and turned the page. Sure enough, at the very bottom of the folder was a smaller envelope, cream-colored like the first one, sealed, and marked in bold handwriting, "To be opened in private." My chest tightened as I held it. What could possibly be left to say? What secret was too dangerous or too personal for anyone else to read? I set it down in front of me, my pulse racing. My father had already shattered everything I thought I knew about him, about Daniel, about myself. But as I stared at that second envelope, I had the sickening feeling that the real truth hadn't even started yet. I reached for the envelope, hesitated, and whispered to the empty room, "What did you do, Dad?" Then, with trembling fingers, I broke the seal. The second envelope sat on the table, small and pale against the wood grain, but it might as well have been ticking. I stared at it for a long time, my pulse thrumming in my ears. I wasn't sure I could take any more truth, not after what I'd just read. But the longer I waited, the heavier it seemed to grow, as if it were demanding to be opened. Finally, I slipped my thumb under the seal and pulled the flap open. Inside was a single folded note, a brass key, and a few faded photographs tied with a thin piece of string. The note was brief, written in my father's precise, angular handwriting. "Clara, for the truth, go to the lake house." My stomach clenched. The lake house. I hadn't set foot there since I was 17. It used to be our family's summer retreat, a quiet cabin an hour outside the city, near the woods, and the still water where I'd learned to swim. It was also the last place I remembered my father smiling at me, genuinely, before everything between us turned to ice. The photographs were black and white, creased from age. The first was of the lake house porch, Daniel and me as children, barefoot, holding fishing rods. The next few were harder to place, pictures of my father standing beside a car I didn't recognize, and others of him outside the company's headquarters with men I'd never seen. The last photo made me pause. It was recent, taken just months before his death. My father was sitting in a chair near the lake, his face gaunt, but his expression almost peaceful. On the back, he'd written in shaky ink, "You'll understand when you see." The brass key was old, worn smooth from use. I held it up to the light and saw the number 12 engraved on the head. I remembered a small chest in my old bedroom, one I'd never been able to open as a teenager because he'd kept the key hidden. A strange chill ran through me. Whatever my father wanted me to find, it wasn't just about guilt anymore. It was something deeper, something he couldn't bear to reveal in life. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying his words. For the truth, go to the lake house. I didn't know if I was chasing closure or punishment, but by dawn, I was in my car. The letter folded in my purse, the key resting on the passenger seat like an unspoken promise. The drive felt longer than it used to. Trees lined the winding road, their branches skeletal in the gray morning light. When I finally pulled up to the old property, the lake stretched out in front of me, still and mirror-like, just as I remembered. The house stood at the edge of the water, weathered, quiet, yet hauntingly familiar. The moment I stepped inside, the scent of dust and cedar hit me. Everything was exactly where it had been decades ago. The worn couch, the framed photographs, even the chipped mug my mother used to drink tea from. It was as if time had paused the day we stopped coming. I walked through each room slowly, trailing my fingers along the furniture, the memories pressing in like ghosts. When I reached my old bedroom, I stopped. The faded wallpaper was peeling, and the bed frame sagged, but in the corner, half hidden under a stack of boxes, was the small chest I remembered. My hands shook as I knelt down. The lock was tarnished but intact. I fit the brass key into it, turned it once, and heard a soft click. The lid creaked open. Inside was a collection of neatly organized folders, a small leather-bound journal, and a stack of photographs, these not from childhood, but adulthood. I lifted the journal first. My father's handwriting filled the pages, notes, dates, references to company meetings, and a series of entries that made my pulse race. Daniel is moving money again. I confronted him, but he denies it. I have records. He'll destroy everything if I let this continue. Found proof of offshore accounts. Can't involve the police yet. Need leverage first. Clara must never know. Not yet. I flipped through, the words blurring together in my head. He'd known everything. Daniel's theft, his lies, his manipulation, and had spent years documenting it in secret. Among the papers were financial records, transactions, signatures, names I didn't recognize, but the photographs made my hands go cold. There was Daniel, shaking hands with men in dark suits outside a warehouse. Another showed him exchanging envelopes with someone I vaguely recognized from my father's company board. The final photo stopped me completely. It was taken inside my father's study at home. Harold and Daniel stood facing each other, mid-argument. My father's hand was raised, his face drawn with anger and fear. But what made my stomach drop was Daniel's right hand, clenched tightly around something metallic. A small bottle, a syringe cap glinting at the edge. My breath hitched. My father's trembling note, the suddenness of his death, Daniel's insistence on cremation. It all began to connect like dark threads weaving a single, terrible picture. The air felt thin in the room. My father hadn't only wanted me to know about Daniel's greed. He wanted me to know something far worse. I sat on the floor, surrounded by his journals and proof of everything he'd hidden. My heart pounded in my ears, part fury, part heartbreak. He'd been preparing me, not just to forgive, but to finish what he couldn't. I turned the photo over, hoping for some explanation. There, in my father's unsteady scrawl, were 5 words that made my blood run cold. Ask him about that night. The photograph trembled in my hand as I studied it again under the dim light of the lake. House. Daniel's face in the image was twisted in fury, eyes narrowed, jaw tight. My father stood opposite him, pale and weary, but defiant. And that small glint of metal in Daniel's hand. It was impossible to ignore. A syringe cap, clear as day. I stared at the back of the photo once more. 5 words written in my father's frail handwriting. Ask him about that night. that night. I didn't need to ask which one he meant. The night my father died. When I left the hospital that evening, Daniel had been nowhere in sight. I'd assumed he hadn't bothered to come, but now, as I replayed the timeline in my head, something didn't fit. The next morning, Daniel had called me, his voice cold, flat, telling me Dad was gone. He'd already arranged everything before I even had the chance to speak, and within 48 hours, the cremation had been carried out. Too quickly, much too quickly. The more I thought about it, the more the memory twisted inside me. Why had he been in such a rush to burn everything? Literally? By the time I left the lake house, the sky had gone dark and heavy with rain. The drive back felt endless, the windshield wipers squeaking in rhythm with my racing thoughts. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove straight to the hospital. The same sterile hallways, the same faint smell of antiseptic, and the same nurse at the reception desk. She looked up in surprise when I asked if Dr. Patel, my father's physician, was available. 10 minutes later, I sat across from him in his cramped office, the walls lined with framed diplomas and fading photographs of his family. Dr. Patel, I began cautiously, I have a few questions about my father's treatment before he passed. I know it's been some time, but I need to understand what happened. He nodded sympathetically. Of course, Ms. Jensen. I remember your father well. He had congestive heart failure, but we were managing it. His vitals were fairly stable right up until the last night. My pulse quickened. You mean his death wasn't expected? He hesitated. Well, he was in decline, yes, but not in immediate danger. Then there was a sudden reaction. His blood pressure dropped rapidly, and he became unresponsive within minutes. We assumed it was a complication from the medication, but the timing was unusual. Unusual how? Dr. Patel leaned back, frowning slightly. He'd been stable that afternoon. The last note in the visitor log shows that your brother Daniel came by around 7 p.m. After that, no one else saw him until the nurse checked at 10. By then, your father was already in distress. I sat frozen, the words echoing in my head. Daniel had been there that night. He'd visited him unannounced, and hours later, my father was gone. The doctor continued. We asked Mr. Jensen a few questions afterward, of course, but he said they'd only spoken briefly. He seemed quite composed, given the circumstances. I forced a small nod, thanked the doctor, and left before the rising nausea could show on my face. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air felt too still, too heavy. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. If what the photo suggested was true, if Daniel had confronted our father that night, if the syringe had been more than coincidence, then maybe his death hadn't been natural at all. My anger burned cold this time, sharpened into resolve. I wasn't going to accuse him blindly. I needed proof, something undeniable. The next morning I called Robert Keller, the lawyer handling the estate. I told him I needed access to any security footage from the hospital, visitor logs, surveillance, anything from that night. He promised to check and called me back a few hours later. Clara, he said, his tone uneasy, I did some digging. The footage from that week has been deleted, all of it. My stomach dropped. Deleted? How? Why? They said it was part of a scheduled data purge, he replied. But I've worked with that hospital before. They don't clear archives that quickly. It's irregular, to say the least. Irregular. Convenient? Suspicious? Who authorized it? I asked. He paused. The request came from a senior board member who used to be connected to your father's company. I don't have the name yet, but I'll find it. When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the faint reflections in the window. The truth was slipping through my fingers, but I refused to let it go. That night, I spread my father's journals, photos, and letters across my dining table. I read every note, cross-referenced dates, traced connections between Daniel's business dealings and hospital visits. Piece by piece, a pattern began to form, a map of deceit that spanned decades. The deeper I went, the more certain I became. Daniel had something to hide, and whatever it was, my father had discovered it right before he died. I wasn't the same woman I'd been weeks ago. The quiet, submissive daughter my father once silenced was gone. I would not let Daniel destroy what was left of my family, or my father's memory. Just as I was organizing the papers into folders, my phone buzzed. A new email notification flashed on the screen. Court filing notice. I frowned, opening it. It was from Keller and Associates, automatically forwarded from the county clerk's office. The subject line hit me like a punch to the chest. Petition for contestation of will, filed by Daniel Jensen. I exhaled slowly, staring at the screen as my pulse thundered in my ears. Of course, he wasn't just fighting for control. He was covering his tracks. I set the phone down, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from clarity. Daniel wanted war, and this time I was ready to fight back. The first sign of Daniel's next move came early one morning. A sharp knock on my door and a uniformed courier holding an envelope. The words printed across the front made my stomach clench. Summons to court, estate of Harold Jensen. I signed for it with numb fingers, closed the door, and stared at the envelope like it was something poisonous. When I finally tore it open, the accusation was laid out in black and white. The plaintiff, Daniel Jensen, hereby contests the validity of the last will and testament of Harold Jensen, alleging undue influence and coercion by the defendant, Clara Jensen. Coercion, manipulation, fraud. I felt sick. My own brother was accusing me of taking advantage of our dying father, of forcing him to leave me everything. By that afternoon, the story was already online. I hadn't spoken a word to anyone about the inheritance, yet somehow the media knew everything. Headlines screamed from my phone. Estranged daughter accused of manipulating father for fortune. Family feud erupts over Jensen Holdings estate. There were photos of me leaving the lawyer's office, taken from across the street, my expression solemn, my clothes described as cold and businesslike. They twisted it into a narrative, the greedy artist who came crawling back to steal her father's empire. And Harper, Daniel's ever-loyal wife, was behind the social firestorm. Her posts on social media painted me as a manipulative, aging woman who had reappeared only after smelling money. One particularly cruel post read, "Some people don't visit their fathers in the hospital until they know there's a will waiting. Money changes everything." Hundreds of comments followed. Strangers dissected my life, my career, even my looks. My name was trending for all the wrong reasons. I stopped answering the phone. Friends I'd known for years suddenly went quiet. Some sent polite texts. "We're so sorry you're going through this." Others stopped reaching out altogether. I didn't blame them. People like to stay away from scandal. I spent days in isolation, alternating between disbelief and fury. The injustice of it burned. Daniel had already stolen my past, now he was trying to steal my dignity too. But I wasn't going to let him. On the third day, I walked into the office of Deidre Cole, an attorney recommended by Keller. Her reputation preceded her. Sharp, calm, with the kind of quiet authority that made even powerful men nervous. She was in her early 40s, dressed in a gray suit, her dark hair pulled into a low bun. "Ms. Jensen," she said, shaking my hand firmly, "I've reviewed your file. You're not the first person to be accused of coercion after a late life will change, but I've also seen enough of these to know when the wrong sibling's talking." Her confidence steadied me more than I expected. "I don't want revenge," I said softly. "I just want the truth to come out." Deidre smiled faintly. "Then we'll make sure it does. But the truth needs evidence. We'll start there." Over the next few days, she helped me organize every document my father had left. His journals, company ledgers, the photographs from the lake house. She explained that Daniel's financial history would be crucial. "If we can prove a pattern of fraud or deceit," she said, "his credibility collapses." She was right. Hidden in the old records were traces of Daniel's embezzlement, the same transactions my father had written about. Deidre called in a forensic accountant who confirmed that millions had quietly disappeared from Jensen Holdings over the years. Still, Daniel fought dirty. He hired an aggressive lawyer named Kent Loring, someone who specialized in high-profile estate disputes. Within a week, he filed motions, leaked documents, and sent veiled threats through the press. I watched him on a news segment, all charm and crocodile tears. "My sister and I loved our father deeply," he said smoothly. "It's tragic to think his final days were tainted by manipulation." Manipulation. That word again. It echoed through every headline, every whisper. He wanted to bury me in shame before the trial even began, but I stayed quiet. I let him talk. Deidre noticed. "You're not fighting back publicly," she said one evening as we sat in her office reviewing documents. I looked out the window at the city lights stretching across the skyline. "He's trying to bait me," I said. "Every time I've spoken up in the past, I've been twisted into the villain. I'm done defending myself with words." She nodded approvingly. "Then let's defend you with evidence." We worked late into the night, piecing together a case that would expose Daniel for everything he was: a liar, a thief, and possibly something worse. Still, he didn't stop. He sent messages through mutual acquaintances, thinly veiled threats meant to rattle me. One came from an old friend of his who showed up unannounced at my gallery. "Daniel says this could all go away if you sign the company shares over to him," the man said. "You don't need the stress, Clara. You're not built for this." I laughed then. A bitter, hollow sound. "Tell Daniel I'm exactly what he built me to be." That night, as I sat at home reviewing documents, a new email notification appeared on my laptop. No sender name, no subject line, just a blank address. My heart raced as I hovered over it. When I finally clicked it open, 5 words glared back at me in bold text. "He did it. Proof attached." There was one file, an MP4 video, time-stamped the night of my father's death. My fingers trembled as I stared at the screen, the cursor hovering over the play button. I didn't know who had sent it or why, but a cold certainty settled over me. Whatever was on that video was going to change everything. With one deep breath, I clicked play. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the screen, unable to move. The words, "He did it. Proof attached," burned into my vision. My palms were damp, my pulse pounding in my throat. Every instinct screamed that opening that file would change everything, that once I saw what was inside, there would be no going back. Still, I couldn't stop myself. With a trembling breath, I double-clicked the file. The video loaded in silence, a grainy feed from what looked like a hospital security camera. The timestamp in the corner read 10:42 p.m., the night my father died. The footage showed the hallway outside his room, dimly lit, mostly empty. A nurse passed by once, then disappeared down the corridor. The seconds ticked by. Then a familiar figure stepped into view. Daniel. My breath caught. He was wearing a dark coat, baseball cap pulled low. Even with the poor resolution, I knew that walk. Brisk, confident, entitled. He glanced around, then slipped quietly into my father's room. The camera angle didn't reach inside, but a few minutes later, he reappeared, his posture stiff, his movements tense. He looked over his shoulder, pocketed something small, and left the frame. The video ended there. But as I sat frozen, a second file began to download automatically. Another clip, from a different angle. My cursor hovered uncertainly before I clicked play. This one was from a smaller camera, likely inside the room itself, angled toward the IV stand. The timestamp matched the previous video. There was my father, frail, asleep, chest rising shallowly. And then Daniel entered. I leaned closer, my hand covering my mouth. He moved toward the IV line, glancing toward the door as if to make sure no one was watching. Then, in one smooth motion, he removed a syringe from his pocket and injected it into the line. The gesture was practiced, deliberate. My entire body went cold. When he was done, he stood there for a moment, staring down at our father's still form. His lips moved, but there was no sound. Then he reached out, almost gently, and pressed a hand against the bed rail, like a mockery of affection. After that, he walked out, calm and composed, as if he hadn't just murdered the man who gave him everything. I couldn't breathe. For years, I'd told myself my father's death had been natural. For months, I'd convinced myself I was overreacting. But here it was, the undeniable truth, pixelated and silent. My brother hadn't just betrayed us. He'd killed our father. The video ended, and I sat there, staring at the black screen, tears streaming down my face. I didn't even realize my hands were shaking until I saw the cursor flicker across the desktop. Then another message appeared, this time at the bottom of the email thread. Just one line, typed in a plain font. Your father wanted you to know the truth. My throat tightened. Whoever had sent this, whoever had risked exposing Daniel, had known exactly what I needed. It was the closure I'd been searching for, wrapped in horror. Without hesitation, I forwarded everything to Deidre. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Clara? Her voice was tense, controlled. I got the file. Are you safe right now? Yes, I managed, though my voice cracked. It's him. It's Daniel. I saw it. There was a brief pause. I'm contacting the police. Do not reach out to him, and don't mention this to anyone else. Let's do this right. For the next few hours, everything moved in slow motion. Deidre called the authorities, then forwarded the footage to the district attorney. By dawn, an official investigation had begun. Meanwhile, I sat in silence at my dining table, the video replaying in my mind like a haunting I couldn't turn off. The image of Daniel's face, the calmness in his movements, was burned into me. I didn't feel anger anymore, just sorrow. Sorrow so deep it was almost quiet. By noon, word must have reached Daniel, because my phone began to ring nonstop. Calls, messages, voicemails. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The truth no longer needed my voice. It spoke for itself. Then came a message from an unknown number. We need to talk. You don't understand what you've done. I stared at it for a long time, then turned off my phone. Deidre called again later that day, her tone sharper this time. They're moving fast. The video's been authenticated by the authorities. Daniel's legal challenge is now part of a criminal inquiry. You did the right thing by bringing this forward. I just want it to end, I whispered. It will, she said, but not until justice is served. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, the city lights reflecting off the glass, waiting for the inevitable. I thought about my father's final words. You're my greatest regret. I understood now. It wasn't regret for having me. It was regret for creating Daniel, for enabling him, for never seeing what he truly was. My father had left me everything because he trusted me to do what he couldn't, to face the truth, to expose it. The following morning, I was making coffee when my phone buzzed again. This time, a call from Deidre. Her voice was steady but urgent. It's happening, she said. The police just arrived at Daniel's house. They're serving a warrant for arrest. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. The weight I'd carried for so long began to lift, replaced by something else. Stillness, maybe even peace. Through the quiet of my kitchen, I could almost hear the echo of handcuffs snapping shut. For the first time in decades, I felt my father's presence, not in anger, but in absolution. The news broke the next morning. Daniel Jensen, arrested for fraud and manslaughter. It was on every channel, every website, every whisper in the coffee shops downtown. His face flashed across the screen, the perfect image of defeat. The same man who once strutted through boardrooms now stood in handcuffs, his head bowed, the flash of cameras reflecting in his eyes. The investigation had been swift. The hospital records, the deleted footage, even the falsified prescriptions. Each piece aligned perfectly, like a puzzle my father had left behind for me to finish. Daniel hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen lives. He'd stolen time. And now he couldn't hide behind charm or power anymore. I didn't speak to the reporters. I didn't answer calls. When they asked for a statement, I simply said, no comment. But I went to every hearing. I sat in the front row, silent, unmoving, as the prosecutors laid out the evidence, every transfer, every fake account, every lie. The video played on the courtroom screen. Gasps filled the room as the truth unfolded in stark, digital clarity. Daniel refused to look at me, not once. When the judge asked if the victim's family had anything to say, I stood, but didn't speak. My silence filled the room heavier than any words could. It was the same silence I had lived with all those years, now turned into something stronger, a weapon, a statement, a reckoning. After the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, Harper found me in the hallway outside the courtroom. Her mascara had smudged and her voice trembled when she spoke. Clara, please, she whispered. You've won. Isn't that enough? He's lost everything. Don't destroy what's left of him. Don't ruin his name. I looked at her, and for the first time I saw the fear in her eyes, not of justice, but of consequence. She lived comfortably off Daniel's lies, blind to the rot beneath their fortune. I didn't ruin him, I said quietly. He did that himself. She started to speak again, but I walked away. There was nothing left to say. Later that evening, Deidre met me at her office to discuss the next steps. Papers were neatly stacked on her desk, marked with tabs and notes in her crisp handwriting. "You're legally entitled to sue him for damages," she explained. "You could claim restitution for emotional distress, defamation, inheritance disputes. The list is long. You'd win easily." I shook my head. "No, that won't bring peace." Deidre studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I understand. Sometimes silence is the better sentence." She smiled faintly, slid the files into a folder, and pushed them toward me. "Everything's finalized. The estate is now legally yours. Jensen Holdings, the properties, the accounts, all transferred. Daniel's been officially disowned under your father's amended will. You're the sole heir." The words felt heavy, final. "Thank you," I said softly. That night, I drove to the cemetery. The air was cool, the ground damp from a light rain. My father's grave sat near the edge of a small hill overlooking the trees. For a long time, I stood there, just looking at the headstone. Harold Jensen, 1936-2023. The truth shall set you free. I pulled the second letter, the one that had sent me to the lake house, from my purse. The paper was worn now, the edges soft from being read too many times. I knelt and placed it at the base of the stone. "I understand now, Dad," I whispered. "You made it right in the only way you could." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves. I took that as my answer. For the first time in years, I felt still. Not happy, not exactly free, but still. Over the following weeks, I made arrangements. I sold off the corporate shares I didn't want, cut ties with the board members who'd enabled Daniel, and donated a large portion of the inheritance to a foundation supporting women wronged by family injustice and financial abuse. It felt right. It felt like balance. I kept only 2 things for myself, the lake house and my father's journals. The rest I let go. Money had never healed anything in our family. Maybe now it could help someone else. The media eventually moved on to another scandal. Harper disappeared from social media. Daniel awaited sentencing, and I returned to my art studio, where sunlight spilled through the windows, and paintbrushes stood in quiet rows. Sometimes, silence isn't weakness. It's survival. It's power. One quiet afternoon, as I was packing away the last of my father's things, I opened one of his old journals. Its leather cover cracked and faded. I ran my fingers along the edge, preparing to store it with the others, when something caught my eye. A thin strip of paper, taped to the inside of the back cover. My heart skipped. Carefully, I peeled it loose. It was a note, short, written in the same faint, trembling handwriting as the letters before. "If you're reading this, Clara, then you found the truth. But there's one more thing I never told you." I stared at the line, my breath catching. One more thing. The ink trailed off mid-sentence, leading to an address, scribbled hastily beneath it, one I didn't recognize. Whatever it was, my father hadn't finished the story yet. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the small piece of paper I'd found taped to the back of my father's journal. The ink had faded in places, the handwriting shaky but deliberate. My heart thudded as I unfolded it carefully, afraid that if I moved too quickly, the words might disappear altogether. The first line was simple, barely a whisper on the page. "Clara, I left it all to you, not out of guilt, but because you earned what love truly means." I sank into the nearest chair, the weight of the note settling deep in my chest. All this time, I'd believed the inheritance was an apology, a final attempt by my father to make amends for years of silence. But this was different. His words were steady, honest in a way I'd never seen from him in life. "You were always stronger than I was," he wrote. "When I tried to control you, you fought for your own voice. When I pushed you away, you built your own life. You didn't need my approval. You needed freedom. I didn't understand that then, but I do. Now." A lump rose in my throat. I could almost hear his voice, softer now, stripped of pride. "Daniel knew how to charm. You knew how to endure. You learned that love is not obedience, it's courage. And in the end, I realized that if anyone could be trusted to rebuild what I destroyed, it was you." I pressed the paper against my chest, closing my eyes. The years of anger, of confusion, of emptiness, it all began to ease, replaced by something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. He hadn't left me the inheritance as punishment for Daniel or as repentance for himself. He'd left it because, finally, he understood who I was. I smiled through the tears that blurred my vision. My father, Harold Jensen, the man who'd once called me his greatest regret, had ended his story by giving me something greater than money. He'd given me trust. The letter continued, its last lines shaky but certain. I built a life on power and lost myself to it. You built yours on art, truth, and compassion. That's the legacy worth keeping. Use what I've left you to create, not to destroy. Let silence speak where anger once ruled. That's how you'll heal what I broke. When I reached the end, I couldn't move for a while. The note rested in my hands, light as air, but heavy with meaning. All the pain, all the battles, had led to this single moment of clarity. He hadn't been the father I needed, but in his final act, he'd given me the closure I never thought I'd find. The following weekend, I drove back to the lake house. The drive felt different this time, lighter somehow. The trees arched overhead like sentinels, and when I reached the water, it shimmered gold under the afternoon sun. The house, though worn and quiet, had become my sanctuary. I'd restored parts of it, new paint, clean windows, but I left certain things untouched. The porch swing, the faded rug, the faint scratches on the doorframe marking Daniel's and my heights as children. Ghosts, all of them, but ones I'd finally made peace with. I set up my easel by the window overlooking the lake and began painting again, something I hadn't done freely in years. Not for a gallery, not for a commission, but for myself. Colors flowed from my brush like breath, deep blues, soft yellows, and a horizon that stretched endlessly, the way my future finally did. As the months passed, I turned the chaos of my family's story into something new. I started writing, not as a painter, but as a daughter reclaiming her truth. I called it The Weight of Silence. It wasn't a tale of revenge, not really. It was a story about forgiveness, the kind that doesn't erase the past but acknowledges it, transforms it, and finally lets it go. When the memoir was published, letters began arriving from strangers, women who'd been disbelieved, betrayed, silenced. They thanked me for giving voice to the pain they'd never dared to speak. And I realized that maybe that was my father's final lesson. By freeing me from bitterness, he'd given me the power to free others. Years later, I still visit the lake house every summer. I bring fresh flowers for the small garden my mother once tended and sit on the porch as the sun dips low over the water. The silence no longer feels empty. It feels whole. Sometimes I still read his final note. The paper has grown soft, almost translucent, the ink faint. But those words, those impossible, beautiful words, never lose their weight. You earned what love truly means. I think about the little girl who once begged her father to see her, the young woman who left home with nothing, the older woman who returned to find truth buried beneath ashes. I think about how far she's come. The lake glows orange in the dying light, and the breeze stirs the pages of my open journal beside me. I reach for the note, holding it gently, and watch the sun slip beyond the horizon. For the first time, I don't feel alone. My father is gone, but his silence, the same silence that once hurt me, has turned into peace. He left me everything, the fortune, the legacy, the truth. But in the end, none of that mattered as much as the understanding that came with it. He left me everything. But the greatest gift was finally understanding why. In the end, my father's final words weren't a curse. They were a confession. He'd spent a lifetime chasing power, only to realize love was the only thing worth leaving behind. I thought he left me his fortune out of guilt, but now I know it was faith. Faith that I'd turn his mistakes into meaning. He left me everything, but the greatest inheritance was finally understanding him. Some truths take a lifetime to surface, and when they do, they change everything. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who knows what forgiveness really costs, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that stay with you long after they end. Tell me, if someone who once broke your heart tried to make it right after years of silence, would you forgive them or walk away?